Here we go. Well, hello to all of you fine people listening to our show out there. We've made it to another 10 episodes. This is the 390th since we started this podcast way back in 2017, putting us just 10 away from that 400 episode mark, which to me is just absolutely wild. Anyway, it's time for another Brü A. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and today I'm joined by contributor Will Lovell to answer a bunch of questions submitted by listeners of the show.
I have said this, I'm pretty sure every time I've hosted one of these with you, Marshall, is that these Brü A episodes are some of my favorite episodes. You guys have some of the best questions. Some of the best questions are not always beer related, but you always have great questions. And I end up usually having to do enough research to learn a thing or two whenever you guys start submitting these questions. And that's always kind of a fun, challenging thing for me. So the fact that I had to do a little research, stretch the old brain muscles before we got on here today, that's amazing. So thank you all for submitting these questions.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We often get questions that we don't really have the answer to. So in essence, what we are is kind of your personal researcher going out and doing the work that you just didn't feel like doing, which I think is perfectly fine. But you know, I say that because we want you to take our responses to we try to be as equivocal as possible on these episodes or whenever we're answering a question, because we are by no means, owners of the brewing intelligence out there. We know that we make mistakes. We know that we are, not professors of brewing, but we do our best to find the right answers for you. I absolutely do love the non-brewing related questions, and one of the more difficult things for me when I'm prepping the notes for this series, the Brü A series, is not reading too deeply into the questions. I try to randomly select them. Lately, the selections have been through our patrons only. They are asking more than enough questions to keep us going for years to come on these this Brü A series. Now, just a reminder that one of the many benefits of being a patron of Brülosophy is that we do prioritize their questions for these Brü A episodes. So if there's something that you've wanted to know, or perhaps you've emailed us a question that we just haven't responded to yet, your best bet for getting it answered is to become a patron. That might sound shill, but that is a benefit we give to our patrons for giving us a little bit of money every month so that we can keep doing this thing. So that's just one of many benefits. Now, if you're wondering what the hell a patron is, well, they're the amazing people who appreciate what we are doing enough to support us over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where by making a small monthly pledge, anywhere from $1 to $15 per month, they receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. This benefit might be changing sometime in the future. We've been kind of rethinking our rewards, but either way, coming up later this month, July of 2025, Executive Director of the American Homebrewers Association and longtime homebrewer Julia Hertz will be hanging out with patrons. Founded in 1978, the AHA has been a huge advocate for homebrewing ever since then. And while it saw record membership just a few years ago, things started to change recently, which led to the AHA parting ways with the Brewers Association. And Julia has been a huge part of this transition, just based on comments that we've received on prior episodes where we focused on our opinions about what's going on with the AHA. I thought it would be really cool for patrons to get a chance to ask Julia their questions directly. And we are insanely grateful to her for making the time for us to do this. If you'd like to be a part of this session, all you have to do is make a pledge of just $3 or more at patreon.com/Brülosophy by Saturday, July 26th, as Julia's going to be hanging out on Sunday, the 27th. And if you're looking for even more, just a few bucks will qualify you for rewards like monthly hangouts with Brülosophy contributors and regular private consultation. We really do try to make your support of what we're doing worthwhile. So massive thanks to everybody who has been with us over the years over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at Brülosophy.com/support when shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts that allows you to leave ratings and reviews, as it does help those who may not be familiar with us to more easily find the show. I just found out that Spotify, they've been allowing comments on episodes, on podcast episodes for a while now. And it's really neat, but you can actually go in and ask questions and I can respond through Spotify. So you can go do that as well. We might read it on the show. Massive thanks to everybody who's already taken the time to leave those ratings and reviews for us. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are legit, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and ingredients and other brewing wares, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Soren Jensen wrote in with some feedback after listening to our Brews Use episode where we focused on dry January. Soren says, I enjoyed this episode. Lots of good food, or should I say beer, for thought. I have to agree with those who say dry January can hurt local breweries. Last year, our neighborhood brewery sent out an urgent message saying that January was already a slow month and dry January was making it even worse. They were candid and said they may not be able to make payroll that month. That's amazing. Well, the good news is people in the neighborhood responded and the brewery was able to pay their employees and keep their brewery going. This is good because they make some of the best beers in town. You said you don't feel a responsibility to support a local brewery that's struggling in January. Fair enough, that's up to you. But there are a lot of home brewers who are happy to support their favorite local breweries, especially if they are struggling. And goodness knows, many local breweries are struggling right now. Rather than blame the victim and say they should just do better, how about encouraging all the people who are not doing dry January to step up and support local breweries even more that month? If you haven't visited for a while, stop in for a pint and buy some beer to go. Let's support the local breweries that make the beverage we love. Now, before I hand this over to you for your thoughts, Will, I just wanted to make it very clear that he's referring to me as the person who said that I don't feel responsible to support local breweries. So he's not, dissing anyone else but me. I'll accept that. What do you think, Will?
I don't necessarily disagree with your comment per se. Like, you don't, nothing makes you go to these local breweries, but as somebody that does brew beer and does enjoy the craft industry, I do have some local places that I support, and some of them have other ways other than beer that I can support them. So Long Tab, they also have their own coffee that they roast, and so you can buy Long Tab branded and roasted coffee. It's pretty fresh stuff. So if you're looking for some ways, like and I know Roadmap, another local spot that's starting to get into the coffee roasting. So apparently that seems to be a pretty reasonable adjacent to brewing thing that they can kind of mix where their income's coming from. Yeah. But yeah, I think dry January, I think, again, for health reasons, lots of people do it. I don't think the concept as a whole is a bad deal. I don't particularly participate in it. But as far as feeling an obligation to support breweries during that month, they know it's going to be slow. They know it's going to be hard. I mean, they have this knowledge that January is a tough month across the entire brewing industry. So part of that is just they have to plan for that and have enough in the bank to kind of roll through it. And because we just know that's going to be a bad month. And so, I've seen the pleas on Facebook, and some of those pleas have been followed, not just in dry January, but in other times of year. And I've seen breweries do the plead thing. And then, they went up another few months later anyway. So usually there's as much to do with business decisions and a few other things going into that, as far more so than me feeling an obligation to support them just because. So, but yeah, so I don't feel an obligation to do it, but I also, every time I go to my favorite watering holes, I'm usually buying a few beers there and getting some to-go beers, which is not a cheap task when sometimes they're charging $8-10 a beer to go. The 4-pack is costing $40-something bucks, because that's a hard one to swallow. But yeah, I'm supporting these guys the best I can, and sometimes it involves buying coffee. So maybe look for alternative ways to support your brewery, because they may be brewing something else other than just beer.
Okay, so this might drone on a little bit here, just because I want to make myself clear. I'm not saying by any means that people shouldn't support their local breweries. What I'm saying is that I don't have that personal feeling of obligation to do so. Here's a perfect example. I don't disagree with you, Soren. If people aren't engaging in dry January but opt not to drink, I'm not going to try to convince them to drink. I love drinking beer. I like catching a buzz. I enjoy all of that. This is an industry of vice, arguably, and make of that what you will. There's really not many health benefits other than, your social life, perhaps, which can improve some aspects of your mental health. But there's really not much that we can argue for beer and alcohol in general. So you got to kind of leave that at the table. We do it for our, hedonistic reasons. We enjoy the way it makes us feel. We enjoy what drinking brings. But the obligation part, I have made a business out of encouraging people to make and drink beer. You can't argue that I haven't done that. What happens, let's say, from me, where I live, where I'm sitting right now in my studio recording this episode, within a 15-minute drive, I could be at at least 4 breweries. How do I support 4 breweries if all 4 are struggling? Do I have to pick and choose just one that I throw my support at if I feel that obligation? I mean, that's the problem, is that, I hate to bring this up and I hate to say it so crassly, but if we set aside the feels, if we put our heart on the table for a minute and just look at this through a purely business/economical sense, supply and demand matters in this market. I mean, that's capitalism for you. Whether you love it or hate it, that's just how it works, and that's what we're operating under. So if you're struggling to sell your product, whether it's because your product is shit or because there's just too much supply out there that it's reduced the demand for your product, there's not much my feeling obligated to support you is going to do. You're going to have to muster up some level, or figure out some way to increase the levels of people who want to consume your product. I don't know how to combat that. I mean, what we're seeing right now in the beer world, at least what the signs are pointing to, is that demand is just down while supply is still, skyrocketing or has skyrocketed. There's just too much out there. That, again, I'm setting my feelings aside for a second and just talking about the reality of it. We went through this boom. Everybody and their mom opened up a brewery ranging from, 3-barrel nanos all the way up to these 40-barrel breweries like Crow and Wolf. The ones that are going to survive are the ones that people want to survive. That's how the market works. So I do feel bad for people I just saw another, Facebook post last week of a brewery that had to shutter because of lack of demand, because they could not sell their beer to support their business. And it breaks my heart. That's the feeling part of it. I don't know, they have a whole bevy of people who feel obligated to support them. And you just read the comments, hundreds and hundreds. That still wasn't enough. And so I'm afraid, unfortunately, if I'm being truthful, that the only fix for this right now is, there's 2 options. You either increase demand or you decrease supply. That sucks because we have no control over demand. And by decreasing supply, it means that people are going to be, out on their asses, and it sucks. I don't know what else to say. And so, I can see how my comment, again, came across as a bit crass. I'm just not sure there's a way to make that point without sounding at least somewhat jerkish. Do I love beer? Absolutely. Do I want great breweries closing due to lack of customers? Of course not. I think the point I was trying to make, again, is that struggling breweries usually just have reasons for struggling. And that's often associated with beer quality, at least in my experience, just to put it bluntly. So, of course, struggling means different things to different breweries. Sierra Nevada is just going to be different than, say, a 2-year-old 3-barrel nano brewery. And we're going to have to accept that. Either way, I did not mean to insinuate that I don't care about these breweries. I really, really do. I just don't take it upon myself to be their savior. That said, as much as I'll cheerlead anyone opting to improve their physical and or mental health by reducing or eliminating their alcohol intake, I absolutely understand how difficult dry January can be for these breweries and will likely never participate myself. So that was my long-winded explanation. Thank you so much for hitting us up, Soren. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. When we return from this break, answers to your questions.
So, when I ask, what is Odoo? What comes to mind? Well, Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a suite of business management software that some people say is like fertilizer because of the way it promotes growth. But some people also say Odoo is like a magic beanstalk because it grows with your company and is also magically affordable. But then again, you could look at Odoo in terms of how its individual software programs are a lot like building blocks. I mean, whatever your business needs, manufacturing, accounting, HR programs, you can build a custom software suite that's perfect for your company. So what is Odoo? Well, I guess Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a fertilizer, magic beanstalk building blocks for business. Yeah, that's it. Which means that Odoo is exactly what every business needs. Learn more and sign up now at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Thanks so much to all of our incredible patrons who not only fund what it is that we do here at Brülosophy, but submitted their Brü A questions to us as well. Without you guys, none of this would be possible. We're going to kick this off with a question sent in by patron Hayrider Piken. If that's your real name, Hayrider, you might have one of the coolest names I've ever seen. I love it. But Hayrider asks, I recently made an Irish ale fermented with White Labs WLP 004 Irish ale yeast and didn't have proper temperature control. I created a starter and ran it for 48 hours. I'm assuming he had it on a stir plate for 48 hours. He says, I had to pause for about a day due to a rescheduled brew day, so I refrigerated and took it back out to start it for 8 hours. I struggled with pH, and at the end of the day, due to a fumble in pH meter calibration, been there, done that, may have had a beer more acidic than intended. I fermented the beer at my ambient room temperature, which is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 C, and during fermentation, the yeast crept up to, so fermentation temperature crept up to 76 F or 24 C. This may be more of an issue of temperature or pH than pressurization, but I thought that adding around 5 pounds of pressure might compensate for some of the esters fermenting so warm would cause. But now I'm left with a very savory, and he put in parentheses, hammy beer. I'm guessing this is a result of yeast autolysis. Do you know of a good database or aggregate encyclopedia of yeasts and their tolerance of pressure, or how we can get that project started? And secondly, what do you think was the reason my beer took such a drastic turn? There is a lot in this question, at least from my mind. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are before I start digging into it.
So funny aside, do you remember way back in the day when Car Talk was a thing? Like I remember riding in the car, listening to Car Talk with Click and Clack, and they'd go through these big, long-winded, like, this is probably what's wrong, but we have no clue because we didn't actually taste or do anything to your car and we haven't looked at it. And that's what I always feel like with these questions.
Yeah.
But there is a lot to unpack here. So, hey, Ryder, that is a pretty dangerous occupation, much less an awesome name. So, but I believe the WLP 004 is the Guinness strain, and I admittedly don't have a ton of mileage with it. But as far as things you're listing here, like running a starter for 48 hours, then putting it back in the fridge and then pitching it, like, I don't think there's anything nefarious with that per se, as long as you kind of mind all your sanitation P's and Q's and no kind of infection was getting in there. Like, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, some people put them back in the fridge and then decant off the beer on top and then just put that whole slug into their beer. So to me, there's nothing crazy wrong with that. You mentioned your pH there. For me, the pH, I don't know how much pH really matters unless you just added a ton of acid to make it so acidic that it was toxic to yeast, but
right.
That's a lot. So I'm assuming you didn't do that because you would have known better than to put the 500 mils of lactic acid into your beer.
The whole bottle.
Yeah. I got the bulk bottle. Why does it call for all of it? So I'm assuming you didn't do that. So I don't think you would be that far off on your pH even. And we've done a lot of experiments here at Brülosophy. Marshall, I know, has probably done a few of them himself, showing that, pH can have an effect on maybe some objective like measurables, but not necessarily on the taste of the beer. So I'm not so concerned about that. And even your fermentation temperature, there could be some things happening there, but even at 70F and 76F, I'm not really worried about autolysis at those temperatures personally. I don't really worry about autolysis and heat until you start getting into like 80, 90 degrees, and then I might worry about it some more. But like even then, like it's warm, and it might kick off some undesirable flavors potentially. But I don't think 76F. I've brewed beers at 77F, and didn't get anything that I would consider to be autolysis. Granted, I didn't use this yeast strain, but I wouldn't think that's it. So, and then even your 5 pounds of PSI of pressure, which I'm assuming you mean 5 PSI, that's not a ton of pressure. Like that's really, honestly, that to me, that's like barely, most pressure fermentation, you're talking about going up to 15 or so pounds. So to me, I don't know that any of these things scream autolysis to me, other than maybe your description of hammy, which if you throw that in as a beer descriptor, Chat GPT does come back with hammy. But you also said savory, which kind of throws me off a little bit as well. And so we've kind of ruled out yeast stress to some degree because you made a starter. There should have been plenty of things swimming around in there. I didn't see your starter, but if you put it in the fridge for a few hours, like you should have seen a pretty good slug of yeast there floating at the bottom. And if there wasn't a big slug of yeast there, then it's possible you didn't have a good yeast pitch. So that could potentially be the only thing. But again, you made a starter for 48 hours. So again, if you didn't build up enough yeasties there, because I know in Texas when you order liquid yeast in the summertime, it comes here and it's been sitting in like 100-degree heat for probably 2 days, and there's not a lot left of it. So sometimes you can do a starter and nothing kicks off. So if you did a starter and nothing kicked off and you trudged ahead anyways, then it's possible that maybe yeast could have had some autolysis-esque kind of flavors in there. But again, like I only get autolysis if I've stored it for way, way too long, which would have to be like 6 months plus, or at 90 plus degrees. And I don't know that I would associate anything you did here with autolysis.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? So savory and hammy can mean a lot of different things. And so I don't have your recipe in front of me. But I know when like my wife says smoky, sometimes that's roast for her. Mm-hmm. And so if you're getting like a smoke character, you could have put like too much roast malt in there. Sometimes you can get infections or water chemistry issues that can lead to some strange smoky off flavors, or even like a scorched kettle that can give you kind of like a slightly burned taste that you might associate with savory or hammy perhaps. And then also like savory, when I say that, it kind of makes me think of a really, really rich beer, which if you had a red ale with insufficient carbonation, I think that could come off as very savory and then potentially hammy, because again, you don't have that carbonation, that carbonic bite to kind of counterbalance all that. So that's a whole lot to unravel and unpack, and I think I touched down all the way down the line, but so kind of the summary that I would give you is, one, check your yeast, make sure it's fresh. I don't know because you're not here to ask, but if there wasn't a big slug in there, then it's possible that trudging ahead with a 48-hour starter wasn't enough because you didn't get enough yeast revive to do anything. Check your water, because again, chlorines and chloramines can do funky things with yeast to create some weird off flavors. So you can use RO from the store for a control next time. Check sanitation, because again, an infection somewhere in the middle of this process could have happened. If you didn't mind your P's and Q's with that starter, putting it back in the fridge, taking out that kind of thing, you might have introduced some bugs you didn't mean to. And then, lastly, check your carbonation. If it wasn't well carbed, or, I don't know if you bottle condition or keg, you don't really mention that here, but if you keg, maybe turn up your CO2 a little bit, and maybe after a week, it'll turn into more of the beer you think it should. I had a pale ale that I thought was disgusting when I tried it, like right after I kegged it. And then I gave it, a couple of days to carb up, and then suddenly it tasted exactly like I wanted it. So carbonation does matter. And so maybe if you're bottle conditioned and they weren't quite there, that could also be a thing that, maybe you just didn't have enough carbonation and it tasted a little bit too savory. But that's kind of my summary of what I can unpack from all this. But that is a lot to unpack, and I feel like a lot of it's just me taking wild guesses. So what you got, Marshall?
Here's the crazy thing. You and I have known each other for quite some time at this point, Will, and we've also worked together with Brülosophy. So it makes sense that our ideas about these types of issues would start to converge. You hit all of the same points that I have in my notes that I've been typing while you were talking. pH. I would bet, like you said, Will, I would bet cash money that's not the issue, unless you did something overboard, like add a ton of either acid or some alkaline, like slaked lime or something. If you went overboard on that, sure, maybe that would affect the flavor of the beer. We've done so many pH experiments, mash pH at least. We've done a few beer pH experiments as well. and they just don't flesh out. It doesn't seem to have that huge of a perceptible impact. So I'm going to take that off the table. Pressure. Oh my God. Listen, I get that people want to believe that if they ferment under pressure, they're doing something good. I personally, after the umpteen experiments that we have done, trying to show that fermenting, even, pale lagers, which, oh man, it's blasphemous if you don't ferment it at 48 degrees Fahrenheit. We've done so many of those experiments. We have yet to return a positive or a significant result on any of them. And so I am wholly convinced it's just justification for fermenting warm and fast without looking like Brülosophy. So that's my thought on that one. Autolysis. I have made one beer that had obvious signs of autolysis. I pitched I did it kind of intentionally as a test. This was comparative experiments back in the day. I had started harvesting yeast from starters, and I had harvested a tiny little amount of some Kolsch yeast that I really loved, the PJ Fruh strain. Threw it in the fridge, forgot about it. About 6 to 8 months later, somewhere in there, I thought, you know what? I want to see what happens if I just pitch this nice, cold, clean yeast without propping it up first. Pitched it into a Kolsch. It was actually my first Brü A bag batch back then. And it smelled not of ham, but of like burnt tire rubber. It was god awful. And I think you would know if it was autolysis. Everything else that we've done that people claim in terms of experimentation that people would claim could lead to autolysis hasn't for us, at least perceptibly from an organoleptic perspective. So I'm going to take autolysis off the table as well. Firm temp. Yeah, we've done a few fermentation temperature experiments, I think, just a handful. A lot of them have been using ale yeasts. I've used WLP004 many times before. I do think that it contributes a more savory characteristic, especially when used in lighter, non-stout beers. But nothing that I would call hammy. It could be that your fermentation temperature produced some unique esters, though 76 isn't crazy. And so I'm kind of with you on that, Will. I'm not thinking that's the culprit here. Another thing that you pointed out, Will, grain choice, that makes a lot of sense to me. It could just be that you used a particular type of grain. I get a really savory characteristic from melanoidin malt, as well as what's the other one? I think it's Munich too, like the darker Munich, that I'm just not a fan of. So if you were using, grains like that, that could be, the reason that you're getting this weird off flavor. It could be a contamination. But my brain really just and I say this all the time, and I don't mean to always point the finger, but water chemistry. There's so much going on in water. If you just pulled that water from your tap, I would suggest, like you said, Will, that hey Ryder, you go and grab some RO water, brew the same exact batch, and see if you get. I would even ferment it at 76, but I'm weird. See if you get the same character. That would really help to isolate whether it was the water or not. So those are my thoughts. Again, we're just throwing darts at this point. It's impossible for us without a recipe, without tasting the beers, to come close to actually identifying the issue here. But I feel your pain, hey Ryder. I feel it. We've all been there.
All right, so the next question's from Jim. See, it's the car talk thing. It's totally like car talk, because that's the caveat that Click and Clack always gave to you. And it's like, yeah, but we're not there. We don't know. Yeah. So I love that we're just sitting here. It's like, it just totally reminds me of car talk as I was prepping for this. But anyways, so the next question's from Jim, and he says, I've been told that kids generate little pearls of priceless wisdom. I don't have kids, so what bit of precious wisdom have your kids dropped?
Jim, if you want me to become overly sentimental, ask about my children. They are my world. My wife and my 3 kids are my world. They are why I do everything that I do. So I would say that I am who I am today because of my kids. And I'm kind of a weirdo. Most people, I think, understand that at this point. I can't really think of. I was just racking my brain trying to come up with like objective pearls of wisdom. And what I realized was it's not the little things that they've said that have impacted me. It's the way that they are. So I'm going to spend some time doting on my kids. I've got Hazel. She's our 16-year-old, just turned 16, is driving now. And her first word, besides the babbling mama dada stuff, no joke, was happy, 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 happy. And she embodies happiness. She is the brightest star in the room. Her smile lights everything. And I'm not saying that just because she's my kid. She's just amazing. And it has influenced me in ways that are ineffable to just be more like this daughter of my wife's and mine. I love it. My son, Roscoe, this kid has a brain that I can't even come close to understanding. And he is just so calm. Nothing phases the kid. That's not to say he's always been that way, right? But he just has this balance, and it inspires me so much to just step back, and not get overly involved in certain issues. And when I'm starting to feel that way, I can always kind of tap into my son and think of what would Roscoe do in this situation, just because he's so analytical in ways that's something he gets from my wife, not so much from me, who tends to kind of operate in the world of feeling more than I do thought. And it's just been such an inspiration. And I love the fact that he and I are so different on some levels, and yet we come together in ways that me and my girls, including my wife, just can't. So that's amazing. And then we've got my 12-year-old little firecracker, Olive, and she is something else. She is always willing. She has no shame. And my wife is constantly saying that is your mini me. She's your mini me. And I'm like, man, I wasn't really like that, And my wife's comment, you guys, some of you who've been listening for a while have heard bits of my life story. But Cliff's Notes, I lived with my mom till I was 11, until I moved from where I live now up to Seattle to stay with my aunt and uncle. And that's where I met my wife, and my whole world changed and all of that. So I was very lucky in that. My wife goes, you would have been more like that had you had the opportunity. And I thought, man, what an interesting perspective. And so Olive is the one that I feel is like my kindred spirit, but it's like I get to watch this movie of what things could have been, like how I might have developed if things were a bit more healthy, when I was a child. And she just inspires me so much to not worry about what other people think, to if you want something, go and work your ass off to get it. And so I got to stop now. Otherwise I'm gonna start tearing up being all, cheesy about my kids, but they are pearls of wisdom. For me, it's not in the words, it's in their actions and in who they are as human beings.
So I'll start with some funny quotes that my kids have said through the years, just for a frame of reference. My son is Archer, and he is 8. And my daughter is Audrey, and she is our oldest, and she is 11. And so my daughter, when she was about 2 or 3, she has an infamous quote that I had to write down because it's absolutely profound and astounding. And she said, "God made ice cream not to be vegetables." And
that is genius.
I'm like, this is like the lost chapter in Genesis. On the 7th day, God made ice cream not to be vegetables, and he relaxed and had a break. So I thought that was great. And I'll get sappy in a second. But then my son, again, when he was about 2, or I think he might have been 3, inspired one of my favorite beer names by posing the question, "Rainbow ducks aren't real, right, Dad?"
Yeah.
And so I'm like, "No, they're not real, son. Why?" He's like, "Well, somebody kept trying to tell me rainbow ducks are real at school." And I'm like, "Rainbow ducks aren't real." And so I'm like, "They're not, but we're going to make this into an awesome beer name." And it actually, so fun story, it was like just a kettle sour, quick sour method, added, I think, raspberries and blueberries or something. And then there might have been something else we added just to make it a little more rainbow. And it ended up getting an award at some competitions. And so we're all proud. I got medals with rainbow duck on the back of them, which is fantastic. But I kind of agree with you though. Like, they drop little pearls of wisdom, and it's kind of cool that you can see things through their eyes. My daughter is very much a rule follower, very much things that have to be by the rules, things need to be ordered. My son is a much more laid back kid that just like is easygoing, there to have a good time. And so the way that you can like look at these two different personalities and see things through them. And I'm in a sweet spot, and I'll admit right now, my kids are in an age where they're kind of fun to be around, and they're not too cool to be around us. And that's really nice to have. And from I don't expect everyone to want to tune on this, but from somebody that grew up with a Christian perspective, I think that having children has allowed me to better understand my Heavenly Father's love for me in the way that I love my children, which is unconditional. And it's a hard thing to fathom, how you can love someone so much that screws up all the time, does all these things that may drive you crazy. But it kind of helps you relate that in kind of a way. And so to me, again, the wisdom is more just in the being a part of it.
Yeah.
More so than just the specific, but God made ice cream, not two vegetables. Let's just say that's like the greatest kid quote ever.
I love it.
But so you get some wisdom like that. But I think, again, the whole experience, the whole journey, and there's a lot of, trials and tribulations and things that aren't great too. And you get to work through those and grow as a person, as a parent. And that's part of this whole journey of kids.
Yeah. Well, a couple of points. Well, first off, so Olive, she just turned 12 on July 4th, hence me calling her my little firecracker. Had she been a boy, her name would be Archer. So, and that is in part because we love the nickname Archie, and that was my wife's, like, to this day, her favorite comic book of all time. And so we thought, what a cool way to kind of honor that. But it ended up being a girl, and Olive is basically the same color as Hazel, and we thought that was cute. Hazel's the color of my wife's eyes, hence their names. Roscoe, if you want to hear a really cool song that kind of embodies some of the way I think about life, go listen to the song Roscoe by the band Midlake, who's from Denton, Texas, by the way. That's where he got his name. But we've talked before about my life perspectives. I am not religious. I used to be. I was raised in that. And I get exactly what you're saying about that feeling. And in my opinion, right, and I think you and I are cool enough with each other that we can agree on this type of stuff. It really does. It makes sense that would be our understanding of that love. There's an ineffable feeling that I had the moment I saw each of my kids the first time. It was like the world shifted, and I get goosebumps talking about it because it just changed the world, inarguably, for me. Everything about it. And they became my all. They became everything. We could probably drone on about children forever. Maybe we should move on to the next question. But I really do appreciate you asking that, Jim. It kind of gives us, I've always said to the guys that, yeah, we're beer focused, but we don't always just focus on beer. And I love getting questions like that. So much appreciated. Next one comes from Paul Beckers, who says, what are some of the pros and cons of adding fruit to the beginning of primary fermentation in a sour when quick souring with lactobacillus and fermentation? Does adding the fruit with the lacto mess up the fruit flavor? Is it better to add the fruit when adding the Saccharomyces yeast?
So I'm a little kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just because he wrote it down quick or something, but I'm a little bit confused about his methods here. So when I think of quick sour, just going through my process, I'm assuming you're doing your mash for an hour, how long of it is, and then you pull your grains out, and then you typically boil that wort to kind of kill off anything that's in there that's not in your lactic acid bacteria culture that you're going to add. Then you cool it back down to about 35C or 95F, and then you add in your lactic acid producing bacteria, that culture, and let it sit for a day or so until desired pH is reached, and then you bring it to a boil again to again kill those labs that are in there and floating around so that they're not getting into the rest of your equipment. And then you cool it off, put it in your fermenter, and then that's when you add your Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast, your just normal beer yeast. So that's how I go about it. If you're doing something different, then I'm curious about your process and how it's working for you. I'm just a little hesitant to want to put lacto inside of my fermenter because I do all of my lab additions inside of my all-in-one, and basically it just sits there and that holds it at the 95F. I put the lid on and it holds that temperature there, and then I feel comfortable putting in my fermenter after that because again I'm boiling it and those labs are all dying off in that boil with any luck. So my assumption based on this, my terminology, I would say primary fermentation happens after you've done that second boil, and now you're putting this labs are dead wort into your, sanitized wort into your fermenter, and then you're pitching your Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And so at this point, all of your lactose should be dead. So I think is that a normal process for you, Marshall? Did I nail that? I think that's pretty normal. Oh.
Yeah. Your process was exactly what I've done every time I've made a quick sour. Now, my love of beer is mostly centered on lager beers. That's what I brew the most of.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like clean, crisp, ale type beers, whether from England or America or wherever. I don't make that much sour beer, but every time that I've made I've done the traditional approach a handful of times. I've done probably more quick souring than I've done the traditional way. And every time I do, you're right. You make the wort, you heat it up, you cool it down to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Then you hold it.
You hold it there with whatever lactic acid bacteria or lab you're putting in there. I've used grains, uncrushed grain, and it works great. It gives you a really funky flavor, which I kind of enjoy. But then you heat it up again once it gets to where you want it, acidity-wise, and then you kind of just treat it like a regular beer. So I would be interested to hear what Paul's process is. I could see people, adding all of the fruit and stuff during that lacto point, because what you and I are talking about, Will, is basically making a base sour beer, like a
right.
It might be like a sour blonde or whatever you want to call it, and then doctoring it up down the line during fermentation. I've never done it. I've never known anybody who's told me that they do this, but it would make sense to me if during that souring phase, those 2 to 3 days, people are just throwing all of their fruit additions or whatever into the mix as well. I would be curious, because I know that there's pectin, and then that you've got fructose, and you've got all these different types of sugars in fruit compared to, say, grain. Or even, simple sugars. If you're adding table sugar or whatever, maybe it would create a more unique flavor characteristic, good or bad. And so maybe people are doing that. For me, I can only speak to what I've done. First off, when I make sour beers, surprisingly, I kind of like to keep them plain. I don't usually do fruit additions. I really just like base sour beer. I love fruited sour beers as well. I just don't know if I'd want 5 gallons, sitting on tap. But when I have made fruited beers, I always add it at sack pitch. So when I'm pitching my clean ale yeast or whatever it is, that's usually when I would add the fruit addition, sort of the same way I do when I'm making berry cider. I ferment, I blend the berries in the cider. I've done it from the start, and it works just fine. That yeast is going to ferment out those sugars regardless. Most of the time when I make cider, I'm adding the fruit like 3 or 4 days into fermentation. That's just because Drew Beecham told me that's how he does it, but I've done it both ways, and it works fine. Maybe it's the same when it comes to sour beer. I don't know, but mess around with it, Paul. Let us know if you want us to reach out to Will at Brülosophy.com, and he can answer your questions more clearly, because it may be that you're doing something that we just missed. But it sounds to me like your process is fine. I would just add, I don't know what any of the cons would be, regardless.
So, yeah, I've been thinking about this because it's just different than what I would do. Because I'm with you. I would add my fruit about 2 days into fermentation. Typically, I wouldn't have any problem adding it at yeast pitch. That's really not a big deal. In fact, it would probably help you cool down your wort a little bit if you just added some frozen fruit in there, and then all of a sudden it just kind of helps cool things down. But
yeah.
I guess if you're adding with your lab, that your fruit's going to sit in there at 95, and and you could produce fun new cultures that could or couldn't do something right. And that all that's going to get boiled away. The downside is you put all that fruit flavor in there, and like, what is the boil going to do to that fruit flavor? Because now you have all that, raspberry or whatever hanging out in there. Like, does that detract from the fruit flavor? Does that, have no effect? I don't know. That might be worth experimenting with a little bit, just to kind of figure it out. But I guess the other problem is you have a lab culture. So of some sort that you're throwing in there, whether you're using, some kind of probiotic or yogurt or a lab produced culture. And, if you were going for whatever profile that lab created, the fruit could potentially interfere with that. Maybe you have something that's way better, or maybe you have something that's terrible. It's hard to know, right? Because when you're dealing with wild things, you don't always have control. And so, to me, I think that would take part of the control away from me. And that's why I would think it would be a downside. But I do like the fact that you put all the fruit in there. And if you use fresh fruit, you're not really worried about sanitation per se. I'd still probably freeze it and thaw it, but you're not so worried about the culture on the outside, because again, you're going to boil all that, and it's going to keep from all those nasties from getting into your fermenter somehow. So
yeah.
I could see it going either way, but it's like, again, I was just I'm curious to know a little bit more about Paul's process before I start making really bold claims here. But it sounds a little different for me. I wouldn't want to put the lacto in my fermenter specifically, because that to me would potentially create problems.
Without a doubt. I'm with you 100% on everything you just said. So
cool. All right. Well, the next question comes from Evan Belosa. Sorry, Evan, I butchered your last name. But have you guys ever pitched 2 full cartons of Good Belly only to find out 48 hours later it no longer contains lacto, but Bacillus subtilis instead? I'm going to just call that BS from here on out. So if you want to call Bacillus subtilis BS, I think it's going to make for a really fun conversation.
Here we go.
In this situation, Philly sour was used to actually sour and ferment the beer. It's currently sitting in the fermenter, ready to keg. FG and pH were 1.006 and 3.3 respectively. Should I dump it, and how concerned should I be about the contaminations of future batches? And all I have to say is, wow, this was breaking news for me. I don't know about you, Marshall, but I was still assuming that Good Belly juice was still using Lactobacillus plantarum, because that's what it's been using for forever. And if you go to Milk the Funk, most people are still on there. But I was able to find a Facebook post on Milk the Funk that did confirm that they, for at least for their fruit juices and a couple other things, they've started using Bacillus subtilis, or BS. So they got this BS in your Good Belly juice now instead of your nice lab that you used to have. But apparently their supplements, so they're like their gel cap pills that they still sell, are still using the lacto plantarum, but the BS is in all their other products. And I don't know a lot about BS. There's not a lot of things that I found that were written specifically for beer and BS, other than it can be like kind of an infecting bacteria that's around the brew house. It is said, at least on my research, that it can produce some lactic acid, but it's still not considered a lactic acid producing bacteria. And so it doesn't seem like it's something people are intentionally putting in their beer to this point. So, you might be breaking some solid ground here, Evan. That's all I'm saying. You might be really doing something. So, so depending on your process, are you totally screwed? Well, as far as infection, things like that, if you follow the normal quick sour process where you let it sit for a couple of days and then you boiled it before you put it in your fermenter, cooled it off and put it back in your fermenter to pitch your Philly sour, then, honestly, you should be safe from bacterial infection there. If you did that normal process, if you just said, hey, this isn't getting sour, and dumped in your fermenter and then added your sour VCA, it's possible that some of that could be carrying over. And if you have stainless, I might institute some boiling water and iodophor and just let it soak and hopefully kill that stuff off. I don't know how nasty Bacillus subtilis is, but if that BS is in there, it's in there, and you got to get that BS out. Now I'm just having fun. But all that said, BS naturally occurs in kimchi and then fermented soy products like miso, and they put it in Good Belly to drink. So it's not like an unhealthy bacteria. I don't think it will hurt you. I don't know. I didn't find a lot of good flavor descriptors on it. I think ropey was something somebody used to describe it. So, don't drink a whole pint of it, but I would give it a taste to see what it tastes like. And if it tastes okay, maybe you're onto something. You pitch your Good Belly with BS in there, and then you let it sit for 48 hours, and then you do a Philly sour ferment, and maybe you're onto something. Maybe you've got the next souring method. But yeah, this was news to me, man. So thank you. So extra read all about it. Good Belly now has BS inside instead of lacto.
Lactoplantarum. I will say, Evan, that this question alone led to an entire 2-hour conversation amongst the Brülosophy guys, because we were like, what? when I first read this, Will, I dead serious was convinced that Evan bought some weird off-branded Good Belly, maybe not real Good Belly, and was like, oh yeah, it's got this other thing.
That's BS, Marshall. That's BS.
Yeah, no kidding. And the truth is, it didn't take much research for me to discover the same thing you did. And by the way, if you're going to the store and trying to find Good Belly juice that has lactobacillus in it, and you see that the Good Belly that you're on the carton you're looking at has DE111, it's like a proprietary BS strain that Good Belly uses. That's registered even. So that's when you see DE111, that is, they're referring to this strain of BS, if you will. But I know that there are people out there who are still finding Good Belly in some form, whether it's in capsule or whatever, that still has plantarum. If you're after that, you can go to Amazon or whatever. Actually, Malcolm Fraser, contributor to Brülosophy, is the one who pointed this out to me, that you can go get probiotic like vitamins that you can just kind of pull the pill apart, and it'll, you can use that stuff, and it has plantarum among other lactobacillus strains as well. So it's still an option out there. But, I want to give Evan credit. When he wrote this question, he had it set up in a pretty funny way where it was like, I've got this friend, and he put in parentheses, that's me, who did this thing. So thinking of that friend, me, and it was pretty funny. I just didn't want us to get confused reading it on the show. The reality is, I've never pitched 2 full cartons of Good Belly. I've done 1 carton of it. So that in and of itself is something I'm unfamiliar with, but it also had, lactobacillus in it. And so I can't speak to this BS thing. Like you said, Will, try it. If it's good, awesome. It sounds like you got it to acidify to where you wanted it to using Philly Sour. So more power to you. If it tastes good, keep drinking it. If not, try some other form of lactobacillus rather than Good Belly. That does suck though, because I loved Good Belly just on its own back when I would always save a little bit to drink when I was making like a quick sour using it. So I wonder if it tastes the same, if it has the same effect on your gut, all that stuff. But interesting to say the least, Evan. I'm hopeful, with fingers crossed, that you enjoyed that beer that you made with 2 cartons of Good Belly. Sans Plantarum. All right, final questions come from one person. We've got 2 kind of quick questions here from Tyson Sather. First one, he says, how do you feel the company Pinter will impact the brewing world? It may be because I'm 29, but I see their ads everywhere. Now, just real quick, Pinter is a countertop self-contained home brewing system that claims to streamline the brewing process from fermentation to conditioning without really requiring extensive knowledge or equipment on the brewing process. It produces 12 pints of beer per batch, hence the name, and it relies completely on hopped liquid extract. So in essence, what you're doing, I had to go watch a video on this. What you're doing is mixing this extract with water, pitching your yeast, and then you kind of put it all into this contraption, and it manages the fermentation temperature and does all of that. And then in a week or 2 tells you that your beer is ready. And then you serve your beer directly from it. So it's not all grain. So I want to get that out there. But you think back to the whole Pico Brew thing, which from the beginning, I was hopeful for that they would continue to develop it. But I didn't know many, diehard brewers who were that interested in using a Pico system, because you're not really brewing. You're putting ingredients together and then letting this machine brew for you. Fine, if that's what you want, but it wasn't a big hit, hence they're out of business now. The Pinter is even more Keurig-like. I mean, it really is. You just mix extract with water, put the yeast in there, and then kind of walk away and let it do its thing. So how do you think it's going to impact the brewing world, if at all? I just can't see it really having a huge impact, but I'm curious what you think, Will.
So it's funny. I actually got one of my neighbors a Pinter because they had a big sale at the end of last year. So I bought one and got him one for Christmas, and with a couple of beer packs. So I've actually had beer made by a Pinter. So that makes me probably more knowledgeable on this topic than you already, Marshall, which is fantastic. So
you are an expert.
The expert at this point. So I didn't help him brew it. We were going to do a brew day together, but our lives didn't match up for a month or so. And so he finally made one. And, it's an extract kit. And they kind of spun it off towards the end to help get enough pressure inside of there to, make it to where you can pour from the same thing. But, to me, it's like a slightly more advanced Mr. Beer kit. Does that make any sense? You don't have to bottle and do all the bottle conditioning because it does it all in the nice keg there for you, which is a feature. And so, I think it's a nice novelty. I think it's going to be kind of like the Mr. Beer kits were, right? There were some people that did the Mr. Beer kit and said, oh, cool, I made beer this one time. Fun. And then there are other people that, like Cade Job, he says on the show several times that, he got started with Mr. Beer kits. And I think for some people, it scratches that itch and it gets them to go propel further. How do I make even better beer? But regardless, it's a pretty novel thing. It's not hard, right? I haven't had a second batch out of his yet. I don't think he's made the second batch yet. And so I am kind of curious, how well it cleans out and gets sanitary. Because I know, especially the Mr. Beer kits, they didn't include sanitizer or anything with their recipe kits that you're buying from them. So you gotta make sure, I'm going to make sure Curtis sanitizes it pretty well. So I'm curious how sanitary it stays after a couple of brews. But yeah, long-term impact, I think at best it'll be like Mr. Beer. Some people say, oh, look, I tried it. And then other people will be like, oh yeah, this is cool. Let me actually do real brewing and try something different. Because again, it's just a mix and match. Like you said, I think your Keurig analogy was about as good as it gets. It's just countertop, mix it together, throw it on, and then eventually you wind up with beer.
So how did that beer taste? I'm curious.
So he did a pale ale, and it actually didn't taste bad. We drank it over, we had a small gathering. We actually drank it over 2 days, I think. So the second day, it wasn't quite as carbed because you'd let it sit overnight and that CO2 kind of dissolved in the keg space that was there because there's no pressure going in there. It's just whatever pressure is in that little cask stays in there, and that's what's pushing out. So it's kind of like cask ale in that way. But I would say, in general, I thought it tasted pretty good. It was very drinkable. Was it the best pale ale? Was it the pale, I can make a better pale ale. But, for the amount of effort, if we're going for amount of effort put into quality of beer, I thought it was a good beer for the amount of effort put in. It was definitely drinkable. I mean, we drank several pints that night.
So I too, I'm 44, Tyson. You're 29. I got you by 15 years, and I see Pinter ads everywhere. They've reached out to me. People like to think that we're shill. If you just look at the way that we're doing our advertising now, you might actually have a different idea, because we are not saying yes to everybody, and we did not say yes to Pinter. Not that we have any hate against them. It's just that their kind of ethos doesn't really match up with our ethos, and so we don't want to mislead anybody in what our thinking is. We're diehard brewers. We like to get our fingers in it, and Pinter doesn't really work with that. I think if anything, it might serve as a gateway drug for real brewing. And I'm not saying that you're not a brewer if you use a Pinter. You're not really doing much but mixing syrup and water. You don't even boil. You're skipping a ton of the steps, and that is totally fine. And I love that your neighbor has the ability to make beer on his countertop and drink it, and that it doesn't taste bad. I think that's rad. Is it hitting all of the little, the things that we love about being brewers? For me, it doesn't. If it does for you, by all means. I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on the brewing world. I'd be shocked if they were still around in 5 years, and that's not me hoping that they're not. I would love it if they were like a Mr. Beer, and people had that opportunity to go and try beer that they made, and then it gets them interested, and we increase numbers, in home brewing again, and that would be awesome. And if Pinter can do that, more power to them. Maybe we'll consider working together with them at some point. But for me, it's just not really my thing. And so I've never tried a Pinter beer, but I have had beers made with pre-hopped extract that weren't boiled. So made basically in the same style, I suppose. Like you, they were fine. They were nowhere near as good as the stuff that we're making, using a more of a standard, even if you go short and shoddy, brewing process. And so that's where my heart's at. And I guess that's my thoughts on that. So final question from Tyson, complete 180, has nothing to do with beer here. And I'm glad that you're going to be the one to answer this, because my response is going to be real dopey. But he says, what's the best smoker setup for hardwood and charcoal smokers?
So this is a very complicated question that could start fistfights in certain places where I come from. So I'm going to say that this is all my opinion, and just take it as Will's opinion, because best is such a subjective term. But whenever I think of hardwood and charcoal smoker, for me, the two designs, I guess there are vertical smokers that you could do this with. I don't have a lot of experience with like the metal vertical smokers, like the barrel vertical smokers kind of stuff. They're not something I've used, and so I'm not really going to talk so much about those. But I will talk about like Kamado and Big Green Egg kind of, which is what I have, is a Louisiana Grills Costco model that's just kind of like a Big Green Egg knockoff with a big ceramic. And then also horizontal offset smokers. Those are the two that I'm the most familiar with, and that I think would work good with both charcoal and hardwood in some combination. So I'll start with an offset smoker. The biggest benefit to me of an offset smoker is convection. You have your side firebox where you're putting logs in, and then all that smoke and air is going across the top of that meat the entire time, sucking moisture away from it, and then going out the pipe, the chimney on the other side. And this convection, it does a really great job of just adding to like some of the best bark and those big smoke rings that you see on like big beautiful brisket. Because when you're talking barbecue to me, I'm thinking, how do I make a good brisket? I'm not necessarily thinking about the other things that other people think about. So I'm just, again, this is all preference and my, from Will's worldview, right? So, so that convection to me is like one of the biggest, things about these offset smokers, because again, you're going to get that beautiful bark that's like almost like a meteorite, and then you're going to get that big beautiful smoke ring inside of that brisket. And there's a reason like some of the best barbecue joints across the state of Texas are using some form of these offset smokers to draw in the smoke and then have it go across the meat. The biggest downside to me is that they are terribly inefficient. You're going to have a lot of logs. You can use charcoal with them. In fact, the way I used to do it is I would start getting the heat up with charcoal and then put logs on top of that. But They're terribly inefficient. You really need like a heavy duty steel one. If you get like the really cheap ones that are really thin, you're going to lose so much heat that it's really hard. And then if you get a thicker one, they're still like made out of like an old propane tank. So that kind of thick, even those are still kind of hard to manage heat. So it takes a lot of kind of babysitting and experience to manage the fire properly in those, to like know what kind of size log do you need to add to either make it burn slower and longer or hotter. And so to me, there's a lot of, again, babysitting and experience you need for those. I do think that you can make one of the best briskets you've ever had in your life on those with all that convection, but they're just terribly inefficient. So it's not what I use anymore because I don't have the time to sit around all day and just manage a fire like I used to before kids. So, so this goes on to the ones that I use, and I'm also pretty familiar with, is like the Kamado Joe Big Green Egg, and like I said, mine's the Costco Louisiana grills. But there's these ceramic Kamado style Japanese ovens where it essentially is a vertical smoker. It's just ceramic, so it's very efficient as far as holding in heat. And I use lump charcoal along with big wood chunks like oak or mesquite, or both sometimes, just depending on what I want to do. And I'll put some chunks of real wood in there along with the lump charcoal so I can get that real wood smoke flavor. And it works great. Like, it's super efficient. It holds heat really well. I'm not having to go out there and poke a fire. I can actually like go to sleep. Like if I wake up at 4 a.m. to get things going, I can actually go back to sleep and not have to like babysit it half the night. It does take a few cooks to get temp control down. There are some temperature controllers out there that you can use to kind of cheat. But it does take a few cooks to get temp controller down. I would say, and I can still manage to get a respectable smoke ring if I spritz it with enough water on the brisket, and I can get decent bark as well. But it is a little bit more of a challenge to get that big meteorite looking brisket that I'm going for, and then also that smoke ring, again, instead of having this big thick smoke ring, usually it's a little thinner smoke ring, just because again, you're not getting that convection going across that meat, because those are made to hold heat in. Whereas the horizontal offset smokers are made to just have like kind of heat go across, I guess would be the best way to say it. So to me, it's like a different style, and you can make great brisket. And there's more to brisket than just having meteorite bark and big smoke rings. But those are things that lots of people look for, including myself. And so I've kind of compromised a little bit on the smoke ring and bark color with the ease of just having a very efficient ceramic grill.
So that sounded awesome. I use a pellet smoker, which go ahead and judge me, Will. As a Texan, you are allowed to do that. And I love it so much more than my old propane grill, that just yesterday we camp a lot. So I'm realizing we camp a lot more than most people camp. And in doing that, we go with the same crew of people. And so one of them has like the Blackstone griddle. That's me. One of them has the like a propane grill. That's Craig. Tim has some other stuff that we use. And just yesterday, I bought the Camp Size Pit Boss pellet smoker to take with us camping. Whether we're, boondocking with no power, we've got generators, or if we are going to a place like next week where we're going has full hookups, we'll be able to plug right in, and I can smoke all my food, smoke my meat on it, and I'm so stoked. It arrives in 3 days. But that is all of the experience. Not all. I did buy a sidecar or whatever smoker that you were talking about, not knowing what I was doing. And I cooked one batch of like chicken breast on it, and it tasted like fire, like this. You just put out a fire, and it was awful. I learned that I didn't do it right, and so pellet smoker it is for me. I don't have the time or desire to monitor a smoke box. And on that, we do have to get to a quick break. We'll be right back with more Brü A. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clearer wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to Xchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
So the next question comes from Owen Dawson, which is, I guess that's a Gaelic name, so that's pretty awesome, Owen. But what are some pitfalls or disadvantages of brewing a high OG and IBU concentrate beer, then adding water before fermentation to increase yield?
Okay, this is a great question. This is the second pros or cons question that we've received this time, or on this episode. So again, I don't see too many. I've done this. What he's referring to here, what Owen's referring to here is what I refer to as dilution, wort dilution. So you're making a very strong, initial beer and then diluting it down. And it sounds like what he's saying is adding with the water prior to fermentation. That's probably smart so that you're not stressing your yeast out too much, or that you don't require, massive amounts of yeast in order to ferment this really high OG wort, quote, concentrate, as Owen refers to it. The biggest pitfalls are going to be your water. If you're using water that has anything in it that might boil off or at the very least kind of volatilize off during the brewing process, it won't do that when you add it cold, unless you, for example, pre-boil that water. But if you're using like RO water or store-bought spring water or whatever, it's actually a surprisingly effective way to get more yield out of a smaller batch. I did this, my first time ever doing one of these kind of wort dilution batches was with I did a 1 gallon high OG. I think it was like 1080, 1085 OG, something like that. And I diluted it down to a 3 gallon batch, which brought it down to something like 1048, 1050, somewhere around there. And it tasted like the beer that I was kind of planning on brewing. I use, now for this one, I was using RO water, home filtered RO water. And it was just kind of, I wanted to see if I could get away with making, a diluted batch on my stovetop. And it was, I was bored one Saturday and whipped up a quick short and shoddy, high OG concentrated wort. And then I didn't ferment it at the high OG. I did exactly what Owen's talking about and diluted it down prior to pitching the yeast, and it worked great. I don't see a big issue with it. I was also fortunate enough to be invited out to I believe it was the 2019 Brew Your Own boot camp out in Asheville, North Carolina. It's actually where Cade and I met in person for the first time. And during our talk, I did a collaborative sessions with Drew and Denny from Experimental Homebrewing. And I believe it was there that Drew had brought a beer that he did exactly this with, that he diluted. And it was a simple, basic blonde ale, and that's exactly what it tasted like. So I've got some experience with doing this. Not too many disadvantages. I guess he's not asking for the pros on this. He's asking for pitfalls or disadvantages. But if you can get away with good water doing it, I don't see a reason not to, if that's what floats your boat.
So what I haven't done this in all grain, but it reminds me of when I got started doing, extract batches, because you're not doing the full volume. You were doing like a partial volume extract batch. That way you didn't have to have the full like giant kettle to boil all 5.5 gallons or whatever at the same time. So it reminds me of doing that. So I've definitely done it. Again, the one thing I would say is, for my current systems, my Delta all-in-one electric, and then the all-in-ones I had before, it doesn't make a ton of sense for me to do it per se, but I do think if I had like a cool, a bigger system that could do 10 gallon batches, and you did like 8 gallons of, high concentrate or high concentrate wort, and then you could split it off to have 5 gallons of like a Russian Imperial Stout, and then dilute it down and have, maybe, another 5 gallons of, just regular stout, I think that would be a really cool idea and something. And if your system can do it and you have good water, like you said, store-bought RO works great, that kind of thing, then I think it's totally, you could do it, and you could potentially get 2 different kind of beers out of the same wort if you just diluted half and then kept the other half. So I don't really see much in the way of disadvantages other than just make sure you're using either water that you previously boiled to make sure that it's totally sanitary and has all the volatiles out, or just, store-bought RO water or something like that, and then I think you're good to go.
Yeah, and another little trick, and I remember when I was brewing, partial mash, extract with steeping grains, kind of like you're making wort concentrate that you water down in some way. You're gonna, in my opinion, you're probably gonna get a higher quality beer doing it using all grain. That's just my opinion, whatever. But one little trick that I developed, I know I didn't make this up, I'm not the only one who ever did it, but back when I was brewing extract with steeping grains, was that I would use, instead of diluting that concentrated extract wort with water, I would go get a 20-pound bag of ice for like $4, put that in my fermentation bucket, and then pour the hot wort right over that. It chilled it right down to where it needed to be, usually, immediately, without the need for, an expensive chiller. If you're brewing these smaller batches, then maybe it's not really worth your while to go spend $100, $150 on a chiller. Just use some ice. People were like, "Oh, you're going to shock your wort. It's going to taste bad." No, people pull shit out of their butts all the time, and it blows my mind. It never had any negative impact, at least in my anecdotal experience. So there's all kinds of neat little tricks that you can come up with when it comes to brewing this dilution style. And I give it a shot, and I think you'll enjoy it. All right, next question comes from David Coons, who says, "What's your schedule for brewing seasonal brews? We are in midsummer. What are you brewing now for consumption later?"
So I have a really weird response to this because I do seasonal brewing, but I also have to do articles for Brülosophy, and so
I knew that was coming up. I knew it.
But Marshall could attest to this. Sometimes you're sitting there and it's like, okay, guys, it's Oktoberfest season. I think Jordan Folks just sent out his big email of all of his Oktoberfest beer experiment ideas. He's like, I got my Oktoberfest party. Like, how many experiment beers can I do for Fest beer and Martzen? I'm like, oh man. And so a lot of what we do, I still like right now, you need to be looking at brewing your Oktoberfest, your fall beers. In the fall, I really like amber lagers, Fest beer and Martzen amongst those, although I guess Fest beer is a lighter lager, but still kind of in that vein. I even like Czech amber lager, those kinds of things. Once we start getting into the fall, I start looking to what I want to drink as it cools off, and usually I like to have stouts, some kind of dark lager or amber lager. Still all year, basically amber lager can be in my house and I don't care, but stouts. And then also I usually, and they're already brewed now, but I usually like to have some Belgian Dark Strong or Triple for those winter months, just because it's a little higher ABV. Usually you're more in the mood to drink those higher ABV beers when it's not 100 degrees out. So my wife and I still manage to drink them when it's 100 degrees out. But I like to have that Dark Strong and that Triple on tap. If I don't often do imperial stouts, but if I do one, it's going to be kind of more the winter time of year for that, especially January, February. And then spring, I always like to kind of get back into lighter beers. So if we can do a Helles, maybe even a Helles Bock, and so it's kind of funny. So now we're doing winter. So now if I'm doing a Hop Chronicles, once we get to the end of summer, early fall, they're probably all going to be pale ale Hop Chronicles. And then once we start getting more to the spring and beginning of summer, I'll probably switch back over to doing pale lager Hop Chronicles.
Yeah.
So.
Well, my answer is even more weird than yours. Like you said, most of what we brew is for Brülosophy these days, but we can kind of tailor it to the season if we're into that. I don't brew seasonal beers. That's just been something I've never been into. I've been known to make nice big rich stouts in the middle of summer, and I will make a nice crisp pale lager in the middle of winter. I don't really have this drive to have specific styles on tap at certain times. I did one time. My brother-in-law, we call him Unto Joe. He was when he was living in Fresno. They're no longer here. They're in Berkeley now. But he would come over and request certain styles, and I'd be like, yeah, sure, let's brew it up. This is before Brülosophy was around. And one of the styles or I guess recipes that I helped him to design is something we called Autumn Red Ale, and it was because we were making it in the autumn season. But I've brewed that same beer. I think I shared it with patrons, actually. I've brewed that same recipe several times throughout the year at different times. And it wasn't like we seasoned it. It was just a regular old kind of hybrid American/Irish red ale that turned out quite good. I'll drink anything at any time. There are oftentimes, even if I'm going to breweries, Crow and Wolf has a brown ale that's on, or they might have this delicious porter. Oh my God, it's so good, that they have on tap. And, not many people are buying porter. They treat their beer well. So it'll be on for a while. I'm probably like one of 10 people who goes in there and will order this porter. No rhyme intended there. And enjoy it when it's 105 degrees outside. I just don't care. So I don't do and I also, when it comes to things like you were talking about with, the brewing for Oktoberfest and stuff like that. If I'm making a lager these days, I'm not letting it lager. And I get people do it just because to kind of honor tradition and all of that. By all means, I couldn't care less. Personally, I'm not lagering them for 4 or 5 months. So for me, it's like, just make it 3 weeks beforehand. If I'm making a lager for an Oktoberfest party, that lager will be brewed probably 3 or 4 weeks before I need it. And most of that time is just so I can make sure it looks pretty, before I serve it. So that's my response. I don't really have a seasonal. I absolutely don't have a seasonal brewing schedule. And that's just me. Right now, I don't have a brewing schedule because I still don't have my brewery built out in my house, but I will soon. And I'll be making a bevy of styles, just a variety of different styles to keep on tap. So,
what a slacker! All the bevy of styles you're talking about. Come on, man. We need articles, Marshall. Come on. All right.
I know.
Oh, man. So the next one is a two-parter, and it comes from Matthew Wilder. And question number 1. What's the one Brülosophy experiment that surprised you the most? And Marshall's going to say water chemistry.
God damn it. Water chemistry. I actually have it written in my notes. There's actually, as you might imagine, this is the question that I have been asked the most since I started Brülosophy is, what if you had to pick one experiment that you guys have performed that blew your mind, what would it be? But there's different reasons. So I've actually got a couple that I'm going to talk about. First one, top of the list, water chemistry. You're right. You probably know that because you've heard me talk about it so many times, Will. Water chemistry was one of those things where I just kind of drank the Kool-Aid that I had been served, which was if your water at home is good enough to drink, it's good enough to brew with. That is not wrong. In fact, that's 100% true. What John Palmer and other people aren't saying is if your water is good enough to drink, it's good enough to make world-class beer with. That would be completely false in my opinion. Now, you may get well water that is completely untreated, that's as pure as it comes, and that may very well be, the best beer that you can make with that water, and that's awesome. For most of us who are, relying on municipal water sources, they are treating that water with some sort of decontaminant, which is usually chlorine and sometimes chloramine. Those things are nasty. And I told my story in a recent episode about, when I started using SMB to knock that stuff out just as an attempt to get away from this quote house flavor that I was experiencing. Water chemistry blows my mind to this day. I was challenged to do the first water chemistry experiment by somebody who was hardcore water chem, and I was convinced that experiment wouldn't come back significant, and it sure as hell did, and it changed my whole perspective. So there's that. The other one, though, and I think this one is more for the shock value part of it, is lager fermentation temperature. I mean, I was wholly convinced that when I did that first lager fermentation experiment, which I brewed specifically to take to the 2015 AHA National Homebrewers Conference, now referred to as HomebrewCon, now referred to as not existent yet. I hear they're coming back, but I brewed it specifically for that. I used WLP 800, which is their Pilsner Urquell strain, and I fermented one cool, fermented one warm, and I took it to NHC and served it to a bunch of people whose names are familiar to a lot of folks listening to this show right now. And it came back non-significant. I couldn't tell the beers apart. And that started us down this path of lager fermentation temperature experiments that has, with very rare exception, continued to consistently yield non-significant results, whether pressurized or not. And that, to this day, probably is the one that shocks me the most, whereas I would say that the water chemistry experiments are the ones that have impacted my approach to brewing the most, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, and yes, I've heard you answer that question more than once. So, so I knew what your answer was going to be. In fact, I think I asked you that in like a Q&A we did for the Brew Club, and I literally said, if you throw out water chemistry in my question, just so we could get a different answer. But I'm glad you went a little deeper because I like it. If I throw out water chemistry, because I have to agree that water chemistry is one of those things that from when I started brewing to today that I really pay a lot of attention to that I used to not pay a ton of attention to. And so to me, that's a big one. I also, the warm fermented lager stuff, I wasn't a contributor at the time, but that really, I love drinking lagers. As you know, you and I both like lagers. And so the fact that I didn't have to like do this really annoying lagering method and could still produce like arguably in some cases world-class lager, without going through these traditional methods, really just that changed my brewing processes quite a bit, and that changed what I had on tap quite a lot, because now I almost always have lager on tap, even though it's not traditional fermented on lager, where before it was just the faux pas. You don't do this, you don't have the equipment, you don't have the stuff. And so I loved that trend getting bucked. But of the experiments that I've personally done, the ascorbic acid in the mash for that hazy IPA, to prevent oxidation. Like I don't know what all it did or if it prevented oxidation or not, but the fact that came back significant, like I was floored, because you do enough of these experiments, you get kind of jaded and you're just doing it and you're like, I don't really expect this to come back significant.
Yeah.
And the fact that it did, and that even I could taste the difference, like floored me. So that's pretty awesome, because I was dead sure it wouldn't be significant, and somehow it came back that way. And then all the random malt comparison experiments I've done, like I used to use Victory malt and all sorts of things, and then I did one where I had a pretty good chunk of Victory malt in the Fest beer versus not, and the fact that came back non-sig, and then not only that, but then like the 50-50 pills and Munich versus pure Vienna malt, like coming back non-significant. Some of those things like really have changed just kind of how I approach recipe procurement and how I design recipes, for ingredient procurement and designing recipes, because, I don't need Victory malt anymore. If I can't taste it at a big percentage in this lager, then what do I need it for? So, but yeah, so those are kind of the ones that I've done that kind of came back and have changed kind of my opinion. And then also the smoked yeast cake was a pretty cool one. Making a Helles with the smoked yeast cake and kind of confirming the Schlenkerla theory there, that if you just use the yeast cake from a rock beer, that was another one that I found was really cool. And so now whenever I'm going to brew a rock beer, you better bet that I'm going to have a Helles coming back on top of it to get that smoked Helles on the back end. So so kind of some full stuff. Okay, Matthew's second question is, what's an experiment you haven't attempted yet that you're excited to try?
Oh my God. There are so few rocks left unturned in the world of Brülosophy. I feel like we've tested almost, at least like from where we're at today. Anytime we hear of a new thing in brewing, we always try to design an experiment around it. So for me, I was thinking long and hard for about 3 minutes, and not very hard, but I was thinking about this question, and I think where it's kind of a spin-off of the first question. My response to what experiment we have yet to attempt that I'm excited to see really is more of the same, just with different contexts. So, for example, we've tested various lager yeast strains for fermentation temperature comparisons. I want to test more lager yeast strains. I want to continue to contribute data to that pool so that we can get closer and closer and closer to what, I'm putting this in quotes, people, to the truth, though, to really understanding what it is about fermentation temperature. That was, I think, part of my hang up with fermentation temperature, or my kind of obsession with it, is because when I started brewing all grain back in 2010, it was hugely talked about that fermentation temperature along with yeast pitch rate were like the two keys to producing good beer. And this is even more so when you're brewing, nice, crisp lager beers. And we have just not been able to flesh that out. And I wanted to. I tell people all the time that my whole, the impetus for me starting the experiment series and starting Brülosophy was to share my experiences intentionally ruining beer by doing these things we're told not to do. Lo and behold, that didn't happen. We're not out here preaching that you should ferment your lagers warm. We don't care what you do. But I will stand at a pulpit and say, well, the data doesn't seem to suggest that this claim that you're making is all too accurate, that there's not much veracity to it. So, make of that what you will. So for me, the experiments, there's multiple that I want to see continued, repetition of, whether the results are significant or not. I mean, that's science for you. I don't care if they come back significant or not. We learn from both, but would be the same two things that I mentioned before: lager fermentation experiments or comparisons, as well as water chemistry. I want to start to get closer and closer. I also think there's some downstream stuff we could learn from water chemistry experimentation that we haven't touched yet, like what is water contributing to the, for example, hazy IPA being so sensitive to oxidation thing. Is there something in the water that might be contributing something to that? Is it more than just the high hopping rate, stuff like that? So for me, it's not that we haven't attempted the experiments yet. We've kind of done the basics. I want to see more of it using different ingredients, approaches, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I had to think about this a little bit, and I was kind of going through some of these questions this morning as I was just, mildly hungover. So I didn't put a ton of thought into it either. But some of the experiments that I was doing a little while ago that kind of you hit a few roadblocks on it, but it's some of the hop substitution experiments. I was trying to play with. I've done a couple of them where you pick like the common hop substitute, and like, does it really make a similar enough beer? And I think I kind of want to go through some more of those. I also would love to do some more like domestic versus continental. So, but there's some challenges with that, right? Because the alpha acidity of Czech sots right now is so low compared to the U.S. sots that it's kind of hard to compare those in a real way that makes sense. So there's a lot to talk through there, and some design things decisions we'd have to make, and maybe you end up just doing it both ways just to see what happens. But I would like to do some more of those just because those are things that kind of interest me. And, I think and especially the domestic versus continental stuff, as we encourage people to drink local, I do think that there is some responsibility that we should buy local. So the more local hops we can buy, that's better for the environment because we're not having to ship them all the way from the Czech Republic. So if we can get some of those things down, I think that's great. In fact, one of the medals I won recently was with a Hellas that used U.S. sots, and it actually did pretty well. So I'm really curious to kind of explore some of those things a little bit more, especially as we go through. And then we've talked a lot about sours, so this probably is what is spurring this on. But you have this kind of temperature range that we hold these labs at, which is right around 90 to 100. And so I'm kind of curious if like holding something at 90 versus holding at 100 for the same amount of time, like are you going to get more lactic acid, less lactic acid? Will it be, just because you measure it with a pH meter, can you taste the difference if it was in there for the same 24 to 36 hours, that kind of thing? And so I'm kind of curious about some of those things, and talking about all the sours today kind of makes me want to get an excuse to brew some sour beer. So so those are kind of the things that are on my head, and then I got some other ideas in the pipe that I gotta probably shoot some emails out to the group and make sure they look cool.
Well, no kidding. I still get excited with every experiment that we publish. I think it's so interesting. I just love data. It never gets old to me. In the same way I could just sit and watch documentaries all day long and learn something new. It's the same with these the experiments. They're all fun to me. So, all right. Next question comes from Brandon Christensen, who says, "I'm planning on making a fest beer next, and was wondering if you have any suggestions on what you would change from the short and shoddy fest beer recipe." I included this question because you were the one who brewed that short and shoddy fest beer recipe, Will. So take it away.
So as I recall, that was a pretty solid beer. Like so any things that I would change would just be kind of like minor little nitpicks and nothing really major, because it was a pretty solid beer. I think it turned out pretty well. If I was going to do something, I had victory malt in that recipe, and that was back before I did my victory malt experiment. So maybe I'd take the victory malt out, and just like drop that out. And then if I needed a little more color, I might add more Munich malt, just kind of offset the color difference that you got from that little hint of victory. Cause I do think having a nice Munich streak in the back end of those fest beers gives it a nice malty backbone there. And so I like that. I think in that recipe I use Sapphire hops, and I like Sapphire, and I might keep that as the late edition, but I might also mix in some other hops, like maybe do Northern Brewer as kind of the bittering edition, because it's got some pretty good alpha acidity there, and it has a lot of those, especially Northern Brewer that's grown in Germany that we get from Yakima Valley Hops, like has a lot of those really nice kind of German hop characteristics that I like, the Noble-esque characteristics. I might also play with like Perle or Hersbrucker, just depending on how I was feeling, but I like the Sapphire late, so maybe I'd just pair it in with some Perle and Hersbrucker just to get a little more depth. And then the last thing I would definitely do is I would use gelatin to help clear it up. I think for this one,
yeah,
I was using I was going short and shoddy, and there's nothing wrong with gelatin and short and shoddy. But that was one of the things that was most disappointing about this beer, is that it wasn't clear. But I was just lazy and didn't do it. So it's not hard, but it's just an extra thing to do, and I didn't do it. So I'd probably use gelatin to get it cleared up a little better for sure, just to give it that. But otherwise, they're all nitpicks. It was a solid beer. If you followed the recipe as is, I think you'd be pretty happy. But those are just kind of the nitpicks that I might do, is just kind of ditch the victory and then offset that color difference with some more Munich.
Yeah, I'm looking at the article right now. I saw the picture of the beer. My first thing, I didn't get to taste it. I would have what I would do differently than what you did is I'd probably ditch the Victory and Munich malt. I'd probably split the grain bill between Pilsner and Vienna malt, because I just like that combo. And then I'd use gelatin. The beautiful thing about Fest beer is that it's plain. It's a simple, relatively higher OG than what you might expect otherwise, but it's just a nice, simple, crushable beer that has some booze to it. And so those are the only things I would do. I love Saphir hops as well. One of my favorite Pivo Pills from Firestone Walker was made with Saphir, is my understanding, and it's great. So yeah, notice, by the way, Will, that you made no mention of your process. Now, I understand that we're being specifically asked about your short and shoddy Fest beer, so maybe it's a given that Brandon's, that's the approach he's planning on taking, but you made no mention of your fermentation temperature. You made no mention of your reduced, mash and boil durations. The beer came out good. So yeah, the only thing I would do is try to clear it up a little bit more using powdered thyme, aka gelatin, and just adjust that grain bill a little bit. So, all right, we have one more question, Will. It comes from a fellow, brew club leadership person, Havo Murillo. Why don't you read this one for us?
So I've actually gotten to drink beers with Havo before over at, where were we at? We were at up in Austin, and we were at ABGB and Live Oak having beers. So if you ever in the Austin area, Live Oak is a great lager brewery, and then the ABGB just has a great vibe, and they make some pretty solid beers as well. So you got to go to the Austin Beer Garden Brewery. But yeah, so Havo, he lives in El Paso, but he goes back and forth to Austin occasionally for work stuff. So always great to meet up with him when we get a chance. But he asks, oh, this is a hard question. I see why you saved it for last. What do you do when a very good brewer friend of yours is burned up and quits brewing, and how can we bring him back?
So this is going to kind of tap into my personal philosophy of relationships and psychology and stuff like that a little bit, because I feel like if somebody makes a decision, it's not on us to try to change their minds for them. I feel like that's borderline, boundary crossing, and it could potentially be perceived as being rude. And I know that's not Havo's intention with this question. Those are my feelings. So if somebody's coming to me and saying, yo, my brother-in-law is a perfect example. About 6-7 years ago, he said, I'm giving up drinking. He never brewed, but he said, I'm getting older. It's not working for me anymore. And he might have a couple of beers a year now versus, drinking way more often than that. If I'm going up to him and saying, come on, man, just drink more. Come on, do it. That to me seems like you're kind of crossing a personal boundary. And so I know it sucks to see a great friend get out of the hobby. We've all experienced that. I'm sure you have too, Will. It sucks because there's that camaraderie we share, but hopefully it doesn't change your friendship with that person. And you have the ability, I say you generally, not speaking just to Havo, who's a great person, that we have the ability, I should say, to accept these people for the decisions that they make, and that's okay. Trying to get somebody to come back in, I feel should be 100% the prerogative of the person who left, not on the people around them. Now, that's a different question than if you're saying, hey, somebody was fed up with this specific aspect of homebrewing and left it for that reason. still loves beer, still loves the idea of brewing beer, whatever, then yeah, okay, there's probably some things we might be able to implement to make this hobby more appealing. I think a perfect example of that is the fact that we've got barely 2%, judging by our survey data, of people in beer and brewing are of the female gender, and I think that's crazy. Is it because we're not appealing to them? If that's the case, then let's do something to bring them in, right? I get that. But when a good friend of yours who's been brewing for years decides that they're going to sell all their gear and quit, we have to grieve the loss a little bit. I get that, but maybe that's the best thing for them at this time. So my response to this is just accept it, Havo. That's what I would say. Don't fight to bring him back in. If he's willing to drink your beer that you brew, share it with him as much as you can. Be a homie and kind of get over it. That's the best I got.
So I'm going to approach it a little bit differently because I think all of us, even at Brülosophy, as much as we love brewing and beer, I think burnout and feeling burnout is inevitable. Yeah. Because you're just going to get to a point where things, and so I can go through what I struggle with and what brings me back to it, and I just tell my story, and maybe my story helps give perspective that may or may not want to bring him back into the fold. Again, it's his decision. Obviously, having honest discussions with people is not a big deal, but just if they want to quit, that's up to them. But, you can have a discussion with them. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. But for me, when I'm struggling to brew beer or brewing beer, it's not really actually about the brewing of the beer. To me, the stress that I feel around brewing is finding time. And I talked to someone last night at Refuge, a little tap room down at the edge of the neighborhood, and Krista, and she used to brew beer all the time. But then, she has a family, she has kids, and she drifted away from it because of time. And to me, that, I have a million, and I relate to that because I have a million things begging for my attention. Finding time is one of the most difficult things. And even with electric all-in-ones, and I'm able to crank out beers in a pretty reasonably fast way comparatively to the system I had years ago, time is always an issue for me. And then the other issue too is when it comes to drinking beer, I need to lose weight. Beer is not the best thing to lose weight, and having 20 gallons around all the time doesn't really aid in that. So, yeah. So sometimes you struggle to find the time, and then you're also struggling to find the calories that you can enjoy it with, right? So those are two struggles that I personally deal with in the beer making space. But I'm not the psychologist, so I'm not the one qualified to talk about all this. But I think the benefit of brewing beer for me is having ordered time. And I'm going to dive into this concept of liminality and liminal space. And again, I'm not the psychologist here, but this is kind of where I landed. So liminal space is this idea that, you're in this state of change. We're not where we were, but we're also not where we're going. So we're in this state of change. And I think in our modern society, we live in this liminal space a lot because things are changing constantly in our lives. And especially with the digital age and everything, things are constantly changing. And so while liminality is great because it creates opportunities for growth, it also does a lot to wear us down. And I think a lot of my stress for time comes from this liminality and feeling like I don't have time to do anything. But for me personally, one of the ways I found to combat liminality and the stress that it can bring is by ordering time, meaning doing a process that you can't rush, whether that's making sourdough bread, smoking a brisket, or brewing beer. There's just a certain amount of time that these tasks take that you can't really rush it no matter what you do. Even if we do a short and shoddy, it's still putting in a couple hours that you can't really do much to rush any further because you still got to get a mash going. You still got to get a boil going. Otherwise, you're not making beer. And so that actual process, that ordering of time helps me sit back and remove myself from the chaos, the crazy of liminality, and put myself in a right spot. And when I do brew, even though I'm stressed out about time, it's like putting on a comfy bathrobe and it just feels right. I'm familiar with the process. I'm familiar with the smells, and it gives me time to either just zone out and enjoy it, or I can talk through problems or things that are going on or look introspectively. And it really just, it takes, again, it gives me back this ordered time to regain some perspective of the hectic world that's going on around me. And so I know that I sometimes I brewed on Thursday night, which was a few days ago. I know these podcasts come out weeks later sometimes, so that doesn't really mean anything. But often, so often I have to remind myself. But like on Thursday, I had enough time. I got home early enough from work, and I had the water, I had the ingredients. So I just kind of threw together, and then I'm out there sitting in my garage, smelling the wort boiling, smelling the hops in there, and it just puts me in that space again. It's like putting on that comfy bathrobe at the end of the day or first thing in the morning, and it just feels so right and so good when I'm doing it. And then, then it's all over. You go to bed, you wake up the next morning, and you're back to the crazy life. But that to me is kind of where I think this ordering of time can really help us put in perspective. And brewing is where that fits in for me. Is this process helps me order time around something.
I love that. And I'm learning a new term, even as the psychologist of almost 20 years here, liminality. I looked it up while you were chatting, and it's a really neat concept. And this is completely not the same thing. I'm not saying it is, but it made me think about, I think my perspectives can best be wrapped up in, so I write music. I'm not that good at it, but I do like to sit down and write songs, and I kind of get out these weird thoughts that I have in my head. And a while ago, this is back in like the MySpace days, I wrote a song called Boxes of Photographs, where there's a lyric that says, "A beer and a joint with some friends when the means justified the ends." And I remember somebody commenting and saying, "I think what you meant was the ends justify the means." And I had to explain to him that no, I didn't. That there's this part of the doing that makes wherever you end up sometimes okay. So brewing to me is kind of like that. And I would say that it's kind of the same for any hobby, that we engage in it for the process of engaging in it more often than not. I don't know, at least for me, than for the product in the end. You know what I mean? I have a buddy, Chuck, who we camp with. We've been camping with him for over 20 years now. And he has always been working on this Cadillac. And it's funny because I ask him every year we camp with him for our river trip that we do for Memorial Day, how far along are you? He's like, I work on it every day. I haven't really made much progress. The means justify the ends. It's the engaging in that feels more important. Now, shameful self-promotion. If you want to hear that song, I was encouraged by one of my son's friends to get some music up on Spotify. You can go and search up That Strange Red Afternoon. I'm telling you now, you're not going to be terribly impressed. You may not be, but you get a little insight into who this guy behind the microphone really is if you listen to those songs. That is all the time that we've got for our 390th episode. I can't believe we're just 10 away from 400. It blows my mind. Thanks so much to our amazing patrons for supporting us and submitting these questions. I speak for both of us when I say that we truly enjoy doing these episodes, and that we would not be here if it weren't for the people who, help us out over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. If you'd be so kind, if you want to keep us doing what we're doing, please go check it out. At least review the rewards you can get for your support. If there is anything you'd like for us to address in a future Brü A episode, first you can become a patron because we do prioritize their questions, or you can always email your questions to feedback@Brülosophy.com, and we'll likely eventually get around to answering them. Just indicate that it's for Brü A in the subject line, so we're sure to add it to the list. And don't forget to check out the Brülosophy Show, where host Martin Keene is creating some truly awesome content. You can find it over at youtube.com/@thebrülosophy show, or simply searching YouTube for Brülosophy. Finally, make sure to head to Brülosophy.com to keep up with all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no